Huh.
Here's an example of stupid people confusing themselves. So I heard recently of something called the Grelling-Nelson paradox. It's kind of like an anti-logic proof, I guess. It demonstrates that logic is flawed in some way. It's loosely related to like incompleteness theorem or something in like
Yeah.
mathematics.
Yep. Let's hear it.
But a lot of the times when you find logical inconsistencies, it's more a matter of semantics than it is a matter of logic.
I
Because the
find
way
that
in which
too.
yeah, people are gay as fuck when they speak.
Yeah. No kidding. No kidding. That's insane. That's exactly what I find when I talk to people. Is it's not really that we're fighting. It's that we're just using different words and we're arguing our own version of the same thing.
I think the experience is different though.
It is.
Like the emotion,
And that's
like
what leads
people
to the
experience
difference in
life.
semantics, is the experience.
I think it can be two different things. I think like you could approach it where you have the exact same position, exact same conscious position, but no ability to articulate it, or when you're reasoning it through, you get lost somewhere. But I think it could also be different, like you said, at an experiential level where you're not even like living in the same planes of existence.
Right.
Like bitches are fucking retarded, dude. They think through their emotions and it doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's what I've been trying to get in tune with. And I'm trying to understand women in that way. Is I am pursuing just the feeling now and letting my feelings control the words that come out of my mouth, but not just leaving it there. Saying the feeling bit, but then also trying to attach some sort of logic to it for it to make sense. Because I want to make sense of my feelings. I don't just want to feel them.
True.
And I think that's the difference that women, like that's the difference between men and women, is we try to bring reason to everything, including our feelings, where they really can just operate solely with their feelings, and that's enough for men to still want to attach to them.
No, it's mostly the pussy dog, but yes, that
That's
is true.
enough,
That
yeah.
is all the people say.
But it's a journey that I'm taking, is just feeling it out.
Yep, one useful thing that I saw on the internet about like how, people run into like dialogues is often at times, especially in places like Discord, you can find people be rather confrontational. On Discord, it's not really a problem because obviously with things like philosophy, with things like debate, it's kind of like expected to a large extent for people to be like hostile or aggressive towards you. But
Yeah.
when we use these same patterns of communication in like an interpersonal way with ourselves or with people in our immediate family circle or social circle, it can put people off. It can make people defensive in ways that keep you from reaching consensus, even if you otherwise would.
But that's the goal in debate, is to reach a consensus, and I think that's the goal that people lose sight of on Discord for some reason.
No, it's to dunk on them and to ratio them.
Yeah, I don't get that either, because the dunking and ratioing, it's not human. That's not the way humans work. So it's like it's the most extreme version of, I think, something that has helped us for thousands of years to become who we are. And we're able to find the highest point of that, which is like on the internet, like Discord or Twitter. It's like that's being like proving yourself right is something that I bet you we've always wanted to do as long as we've been alive as humans. But we've found a way to somehow give the most audience to this type of discussion, where before it was just around a campfire and it was about things that actually mattered.
I think they're two different things. I think, like, yes, the internet does act as a validation engine, and it is very useful for that kind of impulse that we've probably had forever. But at the exact same time, I don't know how much evolutionarily we enjoyed shaming each other. So, like, bullying is obviously a thing that happens. It's even monkeys like bully each other. So I wonder what the evolutionary basis of that is.
I think it's trying to be an alpha. It's like
That's
that
gay as
may
fuck.
be it. Is proving someone wrong, it puts you above them. And if you look at, I mean, monkeys at least, there's always a top guy. Like there's that top dog, the alpha, the ruler.
I guess, yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
like it could be true.
that I mean that makes sense to me at least. Like maybe we are just monkeys, just all monkeying around with our
Yeah, we
computers.
definitely are.
But it's amazing. I love it. So that's something that I, because I've done the debate thing all throughout high school. That's what I did in high school. Is what I did during lunch is I would sit with a group full of girls, but they were like the super left, super political girls. And what I would do is I would sit there and I would argue with them, but it would be more like debate. And I would be I would be the devil's advocate and all of there, because I I found it interesting that they were willing to engage in such passionate conversation over like politics and ways of life. But I realized I wasn't really getting to any of them. And I mean, I'd realized that after I left high school. I was like, oh, when I was at that lunch table, I wasn't really getting to any of them. I wonder what it is that I was missing. And I think it is I wasn't connecting to them emotionally.
I mean, rhetoric is about a lot of things, but you obviously lack the riz. Like to some extent, it's about like establishing yourself. What is it like? Ethos, pathos, and I forget the last one.
I think they saw it though. I think that they saw my passion, and they realized, oh, this guy truly does care about the same things we care about. He just thinks we should go about it a different way. But at the end of the day, they saw that emotion, and I think that's why they continued to engage in conversation with me instead of just pushing me off to the side and not considering what I had to say. Is the reason they considered what I had to say is because of the emotion that was clearly there behind everything that I was saying.
I mean, I get it, but not me.
And that's how I'm doing Discord now. That's how I'm conducting conversations now. Is I'm going based off that emotion, and everything that I say has that emotion behind it of wanting to help people.
I don't think you can reason with bitches, but here's what I'm talking about: pathos, logos, and ethos. So, pathos is what you were talking about. It's an appeal to emotion,
Okay.
a means to persuade an audience by purposely evoking certain emotions to make them feel the way that you want them to feel. The second one is what works with men, logos. It's an appeal to logic. But the third one, which I think is most useful probably when dealing with bitches, is ethos. It's used to convey the writer's credibility or authority. When evaluating a piece of writing, a reader must know if the writer is qualified to comment. So if you establish yourself as an authority, people might just accept what you're saying.
I see. But I throw that one to the side completely. Like I don't like to give value to anyone else's thought just because they're seen as credible. Like their stuff just has to
I
hit a
mean, you
chord.
do. Everybody does that.
But I don't like to.
If you want to convince people, you should.
I I don't know, because at the end of the day, we are living in our own world, in our own emotion. Like that's what we use to process everything, men and women. And the emotion that we get when we go the logos route, it's still an emotion. What was it that you said works for?
No,
I don't. You don't think so?
no.
I had
I
someone
think
describe this as a hole once. It's like this guy, he's on Discord because he wants to fill this hole of misunderstanding. He wants to know more. So he's on Discord trying to fill that hole. And I imagine that filling that hole with more information of what's right and wrong, it must feel better. Like, why else would he try to fill it other than it feeling better when he fills it?
People engage all the time in degenerate deconstructive habits, so you can't trust that people are doing something for some meaningful constructive goal.
But I'm not saying meaningful or constructive. I'm really just arguing the high.
The answer is they're autistic losers who need an avenue to socialize, and this is the obvious pathway to do so with their fellow degenerates.
But that socialization's the high, though. It's you're not really saying no to what I'm saying. You're just calling it something else. It's the semantics thing.
I mean, it sounded like you were calling appeals to authority and logic emotion, which I don't agree with.
You don't agree that those elicit emotion?
I mean, they might, yeah, appeals to authority might elicit an emotion.
I would say the only time they work is when they elicit emotion. And I mean, in the same line of thought, I would also argue everything that we hear elicits some sort of emotion. But I would say that appeals to authority elicit an emotion that validates a certain concept or idea.
I don't know. I don't agree with that. Like, yeah, what emotion?
Of the hole being filled. Like, oh, what they're saying is right. I'm going to align with what they say because they've clearly done a lot of work in this idea that I haven't done. So they're picking up a lot of the slack that I haven't done by just having thought about this already and by being agreed upon by other people. It's like, oh, it takes a lot of work out of the whole process. Let me just agree with what this guy says. It's like we all want to have the understanding. I disagree with the appeal to authority because I want to find that understanding on my own. So I will only look at them and then I will compare what they're saying to what I feel. And if what they're saying aligns with what I feel, perfect. But it's not necessarily that they're an authority in this subject. It's just that they are able to strike a chord with me emotionally to get me to agree with whatever they were saying.
There's two different things, though.
Tell me.
Like I said, that's the difference between ethos and pathos. So pathos is, like you said, getting people to agree with your emotions. But that doesn't have anything to do with ethos. That doesn't have anything to do with credibility or authority. You might feel an emotion in the presence of an authority. You might feel fulfilled by enacting some act that the authority dictated to you, but delegation in no way requires an emotional response. People can delegate without any emotion.
Well, define delegation in this context.
In this context, we're saying someone else is making a decision for you and you are tacitly accepting their position as a default.
Well, it's the accepting the position is hearing what they said, but what they are saying aligning with you on an emotional level.
It just doesn't. Like for
You
example,
don't
like
think
if
it
I go to the
does?
doctor and he's like, "You're gay, inject yourself with this needle." I'm not like, "Oh yeah, that needle that resonates with me. I totally felt on an emotional level that I had a tumor in my brain." No, I'm just like, "Okay, fuck it. I'll inject myself with the needle and go on my way."
Well, more what I'm saying is if the doctor said it, he's put a lot of I mean, he said that I'm gay. So he clearly has told other people that he's seen a lot of people and maybe told them that they're gay or have it or aren't gay. So he's done a lot of the work in analyzing whether or not other people are gay, and he has decided that I am. He's put way more thought into this as from a subjective perspective. It's like it's his point of view, and it may be based on objective studies, but he still thinks that. And him being a doctor means that he's backed by something, backed by years of studying on this subject and years of work on this subject. So when he says something, it's a lot easier for someone to align with it on an emotional level. I think that it's still emotion that drives uh, agreeing with a doctor. It's
What
like
emotion though? What emotion do you think is doing that?
the emotion of knowing what's right, what's true.
I don't think that's an emotion.
The feeling of the whole,
I don't have any feelings of a whole. I'm not gay.
the
That was
feeling,
hypothetical.
not the feeling of the whole.
Oh, come on,
Like
dude.
the
I
feeling
can't.
of the whole of not knowing, of wanting to know the truth. It's what this guy explained to me is what he's trying to do on Discord, but you can apply that sort of to everything. Is like we're all trying to fill the hole of emptiness with more, and
I don't agree.
it
I,
may be
I
an
don't agree that when I
emptiness.
go to the doctor, I'm trying to fill holes, dog. Like, that's just not a thing.
That's it's You go to the doctor because you don't understand why your body is doing something. It's like, why is my
No, I
body
go to the
doing this?
doctor because I have a yearly physical, and he told me I was gay and I needed an injection. So I took the injection and went on my way. I didn't think about it. I didn't resonate with his emotions. I didn't fill
But
any
you trust
holes. I
him.
actually, no, I mean, I trust his institution, I guess.
Yeah.
Wait, so I'm curious. You keep talking about you went to a doctor and he
It's a
told you that
hypothetical.
you're
It's a
gay. You
hypothetical. It's a
injection.
hypothetical.
Why?
It
Like,
didn't
what
actually
motivates
happen.
this
He was just saying
hypothetical?
that.
Okay, hypotheticals don't actually happen, but like, what motivates this hypothetical?
Oh, it's just harsh language that elicits, I imagine, this sort of reaction from you. Is it doesn't really, like, it could be that he has COVID, and that's
We're talking about how you
the
interact with
diagnosis.
people and convince people of things and what level they're connecting on you to you with. And I'm saying there's three different types, ethos, pathos, and logos. And he is saying that logos and ethos are merely extensions of pathos.
Yes, because I think that in order for us to be convinced, whatever you're trying to convince someone of needs to be attached to some sort of emotion that can resonate within you. It's like the emotion I feel is what truly convinces people.
I just don't know why. Like you could see these like TikToks where like people approach random strangers on the street and they're like, "Here, hold this trash," and they just do it out of like instinct. It has nothing to do with like resonating or filling holes. It's just like a thoughtless action.
I don't think it's thoughtless. It's like we're trained as humans where when we're handed something, oh, this person needs me. Let me hold it.
Yeah, but here's the thing, dog. So if we analyze their brain, if we were looking at like the thought patterns of their brain, would we see an emotion? Would we see like caring? Would we see concern? Or would we just see vacancy? Because we would see vacancy.
I don't think that because why would they pick up the trash bag then?
Default behavior. People do all kinds of crazy shit.
I understand that, but it's linked to an emotion. It needs to be in order for them to actually pick it up.
Why?
Because it's a sort of involuntary reaction, I would say, of people grabbing the trash bag. I would say it's involuntary because they weren't given enough time, they weren't given enough context, like they didn't know it was a trash bag. It's just a person handed them something. And when that happens in life, if someone hands you something, typically when your mind isn't on everything, I mean, you pick it up. But
Yeah, but the problem that I
it's that you pick it up. That's why I think it's attached to some sort of emotion. And I was talking about this concept with shoes. It's like, why do we wear shoes? It's because we know what it feels like when we don't wear shoes. And we're trained at a young age to sort of understand, oh, when I walk around rocks without my shoes, it hurts. But when I walk around rocks with my shoes on, it doesn't hurt as much. So that's the emotion that's linked to putting on your shoes before you go outside. It isn't that, I mean, and as you grow up, you start to realize, like, oh, I don't want to be seen as weird walking around without shoes on. But it's, I would say, linked to just the pain of walking on rocks. Like, that's the emotion that's behind putting shoes on.
just don't agree. I don't agree with that axiom that all motivation or all action is necessarily motivated by emotion. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. I guess, where am I losing you?
The very start, your axiom. So your axiom that an action necessarily needs to be associated with an emotion, I just don't accept that.
I can't think of an example where we do actions and there isn't some sort of emotion linked to that action.
Because you see every action as being associated with an emotion. So you yourself cannot then find an action that's not associated with a
Right, but then
motivation. Because
but
even if
that
you
that
find one that's not, you'll create one.
but it's like you can always find it though.
I don't think you can.
I
I
think
think
you can
people have
always find the
subconscious
emotion
action.
behind everything.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, but I disagree with your axiom.
Do you disagree
Can
that
you give an
if you
example of an action associated with an emotion so that I know what you're talking about? Like just like
it was
an
similar to
example.
the shoe thing that I just explained, but another one is when somebody when somebody smiles at you, you and looks at you in the eye, for example, and smiles, or somebody looks at you and laughs, or even if someone like waves in your direction, you get an emotion from it. Like maybe they're waving at someone behind you, but to you, they're waving at you because it looks they're so far away that their eyes it appears that they're looking at you in the eyes and they're waving. And that elicits an involuntary reaction from your body as you feel a type of way when someone waves at you, whether or not you know them or
Oh,
not.
I thought you meant that like a person's action is always, like involved with some like emotion on their part, but you're saying it elicits an emotion from someone else.
Well, it's every action, I
So what
think. No,
about
no, it's not. That's not. I guess that's not a good example then, because that was getting a reaction from the exterior world. But I think it also applies to us living. Is like we will get reactions based off of what we do, and what we do. We want to feel the best emotion when we're doing something. So walking around with shoes on is, I think, a better example of what I was talking about. When you're outside, you choose to put shoes on because it hurts less when you walk on cement, when you walk on rocks.
so what about if like the doctor taps my knee and my leg goes up? Is that an action that for these purposes I would be um like elicit some emotion or whatever or no?
It's very simple emotion. I think it's just like pain, but not a pain that's intolerable. It's I
What
think
about
go
if
ahead.
what if I'm asleep and I turn over in my bed?
If you are asleep and you turn over in your bed, I think that's another great example. Is you're just looking for the same like looking for comfort, and you're looking to get your blood flowing, and that's something that I think you're trained on at a very young age too. Is like you realize that
Am
when you
I
shift, your blood flows to a different part.
am I looking for comfort because while I'm unconscious?
Yes, if someone if you're sleeping and someone plugs your nose, it becomes very uncomfortable, whether you know it or not. And eventually, it gets to the point where you do know it. You have to you have to wake up.
Well, not necessarily. So potentially yes, right? But if it doesn't get to that point, because I'm able to move or shift in my sleep, I don't wake up, and I might not ever be aware of it. I think too what the other person was saying, I think alphabets, is that you can like create a story in which you imagine some sort of conscious emotion being involved with everything. So like for instance, I could say that like emotions are similar with like inanimate objects, right? So like when something explodes, it explodes because it's angry, and it's like that anger that is coming out in the explosion, right? I could say that and it makes sense maybe on some level, but that doesn't mean that like the fire or the explosion or whatever was actually feeling any emotion, right? And so like a lot of what you're describing, and so you're saying, oh, like, well, you move in your sleep because you're uncomfortable, for instance, but it can also be mechanistically. described, right? So for instance, like think about like a sea cucumber. If you poke a sea cucumber, it'll kind of like move, right? As far as I know, a sea cucumber has no emotions. It has no brain. It has, I don't know if it has a nervous system. If it does, it's a like a very, well, I think it does, but it's like, a very rudimentary one, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you if that was a person, you could say like, oh well, it grabs onto your finger because it's like lonely, and so it's trying to like pull you into it, for like social purposes or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So you could invent stories to like explain what emotions you think are
For things that are
motivating which
less than us,
actions.
so for inanimate and animals, because I'm talking
Well,
just
I'm
about
using
humans right
I'm
now.
sure, but I'm using them. I'm talking about animals and such because that your same logic, as far as I can tell, would apply to them, and the fact that like if you agree that like, well, no, they don't have emotions, then that suggests that there might be something faulty with your logic
I
also when
do
you're
no.
applying
So it's
it to
funny
humans.
is it was differentiating between inanimate objects and animals that I wanted to do with that question, because I do believe that animals have a level of emotion that we can align with as humans too. Just because we feel the same, like when I say align, I think we feel the same sort of emotions that they feel on a certain level. Like the discomfort thing. I think that when animals feel uncomfortable, they seek to find comfort again.
Um, I don't know if that's true. I don't even know if that's true among humans. So like, you know, a lot of humans are involved in like, really toxic patterns of behavior. And even if they're conscious of like, oh, if I do X, that could make my situation better, um, they will often avoid that, right?
They'll
So
avoid
I
the
don't think
uncomfortable situation.
they'll avoid a comfortable situation.
So
Um,
it's because they don't see the comfortable situation as comfortable. Is we can see it subjectively and say, "Oh, if they leave this relationship, they will be more comfortable." But they likely don't see it that way, and that's why they haven't left the relationship.
Perhaps sometimes they don't see it that way, but many times they do see it that way also.
They may I mean, I'm struggling to connect with that just cuz I don't see someone that on the inside like truly feels that if they left someone, they would feel more comfortable, but then continuing to stay with them. It's there must be something in that relationship that gives them the comfort.
Well, but then I think you're engaged in kind of like circular reasoning that like no one's going to be able to change your mind because you're thinking like, okay, we're going to do what is most comfortable, and if you're shown a counter example, you're going to be like, well, no, that doesn't make sense. On some level, they have to be seeking comfort. So it's like you're never, in theory, even going to grant that your assumption or view here might be wrong, because if you're given examples, you're just going to either dismiss the examples or
Well,
you're
the
going to
theory
insist
has to
that like on some
the theory
deeper
has to
level.
align with everything. It has to align with everyone in order for it to be
what
true.
what what theory
The
what
theory
theory has
about
to lie
so
with
the one that I'm talking about with emotion is in order for it to be true, it needs to work in every single example.
it. Yes, but
So
that doesn't
I
mean
am
that you
engaging in
struggle to connect.
this
But
seeking
that
for.
doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you struggle to connect with counter examples that don't support that theory, right? If there's examples that seem to not support that theory, then you're open to changing the theory versus saying like, well, those examples like can't
but
make
but
sense.
me so it's me trying to find the theory making sense in those examples. That's what my goal is. And if there's an example that I can't make sense to, then I change my mind. But it's not that I don't want to change my mind. It's that I truly don't see that as an example that would change, that would be outside of the theory.
That strategy is very inefficient though. Like if you look at it in the way that like, Nicholas Copernicus, the heliocentric and the geocentric universe, they found ways to fit planetary movements into a geocentric universe for a really long time. And they became more and more and more complex. And you can do this. If you're a smart person, you can jump over a lot of hurdles and make a lot of stuff that doesn't fit seemingly fit in really crazy ways. It's called mental gymnastics. But when you have an alternative model that explains the exact same set of phenomenon in a much more simple way, people typically refer to this as Occam's razor. You choose the explanations that require fewer axioms.
Okay. So I guess what I'm doing is,
It's called motivated reasoning.
yes, yes.
You're But
But
motivated reasoning is a bad thing. It's not a good thing
why is it a bad thing?
because it leads you down pathways for a very long time that should have been falsified a long time ago
But
if
what's
you
the
compared the options.
falsification for it?
The falsification is not present here, but it would be the alternative explanations.
It's
There's
that
infinite.
yeah, but
There's
in these alternative explanations that I'm looking for the falsification. It's not that I haven't tried finding the falsification for this. It's that I have. That's
There
how I
doesn't need
conduct.
to be a falsification. So what I'm saying is, if there's 100 different theories, you have one, but to make your one theory work to fit all of the explanations, you need to say a bunch of really silly stuff. And then there's another possible explanation that just is really intuitive and clean and requires almost no explanation. You should think to yourself, why does my preferred explanation require so much extra work?
It's because it's seeking to define something that's very difficult to define.
No, but what I'm saying is if another explanation has a much simpler way to define it, why would you prefer the more complicated way?
Because the more complicated way, from what I find, it makes more sense.
Does it? I think it makes less sense. Like for example, like we have a ton of movements. We move all the time. We do a ton of things. So like I breathe,
Yeah.
my heart pumps, my body does a bunch of my organs digest things. To say like, oh, all of this, there's some emotion tied to it. Technically, it could be maybe possible. Maybe in the future we'll discover that. But there's another way of looking at it and just saying our body naturally does things and an emotion is in a more abstract level above that, and emotions aren't necessarily tied to these actions unless we consciously do them with effort after experiencing the emotion. We could just say they're on two different levels. The emotions at a much higher level, because an emotion, I hope we can agree, is like processed with your brain mostly, which is a funny, like here's a good example. So physiologically, anxiety and excitement are literally the exact same thing, the
Yeah.
exact same phenomena happening in the body.
Yeah.
The only difference between those two states, those two emotions, is our state of mind.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is the emotion comes potentially after or completely abstracted from the physiological state.
But this, I
Is that
guess, the state
is
of
that
mind
really
thing.
true?
Well,
Is that really true
I'm
that they're
willing to
exactly the same?
accept that as true. Is that this? It's the same physiological reaction. It's the only difference being the state of mind, right? So if that's true, then wouldn't the state of mind be? I guess we have to define emotion in order to continue, because that's like, I think that I'm losing y'all in semantics when I say emotion, because I think that a lot of the emotion that I'm talking about is based on physiology, but there's also this divineness. It's the best word to for me to describe it. This, like, I think Rick Rubin calls it the source. It's like this source thing is what makes is the emotion that I can't really define. And I don't
That
know.
could be where we're apart because I'm a naturalist. Like I don't believe in like meta stuff.
Okay.
But here's a definition of emotion. So emotions are physical and mental states brought on by neurophysical changes, variously associated with thoughts, feelings, behavioral responses, and a degree of pleasure or displeasure. There is no scientific consensus on the definition. Emotions are often intertwined with mood, temperament, personality, disposition, and creativity. So this is saying physical and mental states.
Yes. So the physical states, to go back to the sleeping thing with defining comfort, that's a big part of our emotion. Is like, are we physically able to feel a certain thing? Like, do we have all the serotonin and dopamine and all these things that we use to operate? I think I saw this TikTok. It was that men, they go more off of dopamine. Like, we're dopamine driven beings. Like, that's the emotional hormone at play in our brain. In the majority it's mainly dopamine, and for women it's oxytocin or serotonin, or one of those like more social hormones. And that plays a difference in the way that we make decisions. But the decision making is like the free will argument. It's part of that. Is, do we have free will? Do we not? It's a good question. I don't know. With the emotion thing, it just makes sense. And like a woman, this is what I was talking about, where I'm trying to align myself more with how women think. Is it feels correct, and that's why I find the need to try to validate it so much, and I'm trying to find the logical way to validate it.
Sorry, what's the claim?
It's that emotion drives everything that we do. All of our decisions.
Yeah, that raises the question.
Say it again?
That raises the question of, how you define emotion.
How you define emotion, yeah. And that's where I attempted to take the conversation, is like, let's try to define what emotion is. What?
Yeah.
It's like...
I mean, would it be radical to say that, like, that's a major part of our decision making, but not all of it? That there are sort of factors that are less driven by emotion.
Well, I would say that those factors play into the emotion. It's that I think that that's the base. And when I say that these factors, which factors are you thinking of? Because I imagine, at least the way that I conduct this in my head, at least the way that I connect the dots, is this factor is going to connect to some sort of emotion. So which factors are you talking about?
Like, if I make a decision to move to Phoenix versus, what's another city in Arizona? Sedona, for economic reasons, like, how would you...
So So I would ask you, what does economic mean to you? Standard of living? You get a better house here versus there, because that, I would say, elicits an emotion. It's like, I want to feel comfortable where I live.
Sure, but I mean, that's just like an assessment of the future state of that decision, that, like, I will have this kind of house versus that kind of house. It's I mean, it could be just preference.
I would say...
I mean, it just feels like a little reductionistic. I mean, it seems like there's always a complex interplay between, like, various forms of mind state, or what we might call emotion.
I feel like that mind play is what I would say drives the decision. That mind play is what drives the decision for yourself. Is you feel better about one decision over the other, and the decision that feels better you're going to take, and that decision of it feeling better is going to take in the factors of economy and
I mean,
everything.
I could specifically be driven by an emotion, but then sort of sublimate or repress that emotion because I know that the consequence will be devastating, and so that there's an element of kind of like, I don't know, meta awareness of realizing that gratifying that emotion will be destructive.
But then that becomes what
I mean,
drives the
that would
emotion.
be
That
more-
becomes the emotion. If you see
I
one
don't know
option
if that's
as
so simple though. I mean, because it's like it's more of like neocortex in terms of like executive decision making. I mean, in terms of like, get it like brain science or whatever. But like, and I mean, in terms of like dealing with emotion, just as there's no consensus about emotion, as you say, like in terms of clinical psychology or trying to manage emotional disorders, there's not really a consensus in terms of how to treat it. Like one of the ways in the question of like whether or not psychology is a science, one of the ways that it kind of falls down is the sort of lack of consensus. And there are like cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy, which arose in sort of as a paradigm shift away from psychoanalysis, like Freudian-based psychoanalysis. One of the main sort of tenets of that or declarations was that thoughts precede emotion, and that by changing our thinking, we could change the way that we feel.
well,
And so
that's sort of the
dominates
same thing. That is what I'm talking about. Is it changes the way we feel about a subject. So like if you see, like if your grandpa died or your dad died, and you feel really bad, and then maybe a day after or like a week after, whenever after, you find out that he was like literally Hitler for people, for this big amount of people, and you didn't know about it. Just giving that emotion more context allows you, it changes the emotion.
But there's a certain kind of interpretation of the situation that will change how you feel or the emotions, the severity of emotion. Let me just finish.
Yeah.
One whole thing. So in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, that's sort of like looking at the surface level thoughts and interpretations that we have of events and our own kind of mind state and our own internal monologue that we have. And by sort of addressing that, we can reduce the severity or intensity of certain emotions. So that, in terms of cognitive therapy, would be viewed as a top-down sort of approach. And there are other approaches like polyvagal theory or somatic experiencing, which more deal with the physiological experience of anxiety or certain emotions, feelings of safety that sort of apply. And so that would be considered a bottom-up approach. And neither one is I would argue, necessarily superior, but I think the whole thing just plays into, it's an incredibly complex interplay of neurobiology and physiology and cognition, and to kind of reduce it all down to emotion seems like kind of reductionistic. And I don't think really.
Guys.
I think and I would favor a more complex interpretation because of the fact that because we are complex, because our brains are complex.
So it's not that I
What
don't
if I
agree
told
with
you I had a more complex interpretation?
Go ahead, Crawl.
So,
go ahead, Crawfish. Let's hear it.
all right. So one side is emotion drives everything, right? And one side is like, well, a little bit of emotion, a little bit of mind, right? Hear me out. There's a third option. Okay. Have y'all heard of mirror neurons?
For socialization, right? So another person will mimic the neural activity of another person.
Yeah,
so like,
yeah. And you know the famous experiment where it's like your brain was like preparing to do something before you do it, right?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of that data. I think people make too much of that.
Okay, but
they use that as like some sort of like argument for against free will, but I think that like the imaging data is very limited and the conclusions aren't warranted based on the information.
Okay, but I feel like it was a important experiment, and if it was right, it means maybe our subconscious is guiding our decisions and not
also,
our emotions or our mind.
Importantly, it's also just one data point.
Well, but it's a very new thing. Like mirror neurons aren't very explored, and this may be important towards discovering our entire psyche is discovering mirror neurons, and we barely even touch the surface of it. So I feel like if one experiment is our only experiment and it proves one thing,
sure,
it may be right.
What are y'all talking about?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So what is the implication?
So I'm saying maybe it's not like our thoughts or our emotion, but it's like our subconscious is controlling our decisions.
Well, that's
so.
Well, what makes up the subconscious?
Yeah, I mean, like that was like Freud's basic tenet, and I feel like we've been arguing about that for the last, whatever 100 years.
What do y'all think is our subconscious mind's goal?
I don't think that the frame of the subconscious mind is accurate or helpful. I mean, I feel like we can have certain things that we could be aware of, and certain things that are on the surface. I think it's like to separate it out as another entity. I think it's helpful.
I'm sorry. The correct answer was cocaine.
What is cocaine?
So, with the emotional thing, I think that let's take the decision to move somewhere into Arizona. Let's take that one, and let's break it down. I think that emotion drives the decision behind what you make, or drives the decision that you make. Emotion entirely, fully, and it's these objective facts about economy. They merely drive the emotional reaction.
Would you say that there's any mental activity that's not characterized as emotion?
No.
So everything is.
I think that everything within how we think is emotion. Yes.
So if I'm doing geometry, is that emotion?
Yes.
I've seen people make decisions, particularly about moving, entirely based on a spreadsheet. Like they have all of their prospective locations, how far it is from their job, how far it is from the local entertainment, all in a fucking spreadsheet. And they're making decisions off of that spreadsheet. And
I think that spreadsheet, it exemplifies what they're looking for emotionally in their life. It's like you just said, distance from work. What does it mean for a human to not live far away from where they work? It means less travel, less being stuck in a car. They are analyzing and realizing, I'm going to be less comfortable with where I live if I have to drive far to get to work. So my decision
all
to
logic,
not, yeah.
Like all logic is based off of fear, right? Like I'm doing this because I don't want this to happen to me, right? So it's all based off emotion.
Fear, saying it's based off of fear, I think is iffy, but emotion, yes. I think that
almost everything is based off of fear.
You can look at it as fear, or you can look at it as wanting to be comfortable. So you can make comfort.
Or we could look at it as reason, abstract reason that doesn't require emotion.
But abstract reason gives the emotion. It gives you, it's the geometry thing that he asked. I think that with geometry, there is a certain emotion that you get when you find the right answer in a complex problem. It's going through all the steps only matters because you want to find the answer, and finding that answer, there's enough emotional it's enough of a high emotionally that it's worth going through all the struggle of adding and subtracting, or however multiplying, maybe. It's like all those things, it's hard work, but there's a payoff at the end, and that payoff is emotional.
Really, you're just talking about motivation.
But the motivation is based off emotion. It's like what motivates us is based off the emotions that we'll feel.
But you're talking about motivated, like what the argument was like what inspires decision making, right? So I mean, you're like talking about motivation. Like there's an emotional motivation behind
Yes.
everything. That there will be some sort of emotional payoff that will be desirable.
Yes.
Like, okay, I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
But I think the reason people disagreed with me is I said it was attached to every single decision, and they said like, oh, you're just gonna try to find a way for this to make sense for everything.
I mean, it does. I guess it's sort of like the degree to which that is a factor. I think will. I don't know. I mean, like, yeah.
I think it's 100. I think it's to the highest degree.
I don't think it's 100% though.
It doesn't. I don't. It doesn't. Well, why wouldn't it be 100%? The emotion behind everything. The motivation being emotion and how you will feel. Why wouldn't it be 100% of the degree?
Because maybe that's not how our brains work. Maybe we process emotion after we process other types of thought.
No, it's not our act of thinking about emotion. It's our feeling of emotion. It's thinking about how you feel and feeling, I think, are two different things.
I'm saying emotion doesn't just appear. Emotion isn't like a ghost in your haunted home. Something has to happen for you to experience an emotion.
I don't disagree with that.
So if that thing, whatever that physiological set of reactions is, occurs after, let's say, a physiological reaction meant to decide your choice or action, then the emotion can't be driving it because the emotion is happening afterwards, right?
It's everything that we have control of, though. So are you talking about an exterior factor playing in? Because we don't have any control over that decision. That's just the natural world.
Like if I just have you in a blank room, you're unconscious. You're
Okay.
fucking out. I have you zapped. Your mind is fucking dead. And then I bring you back to life suddenly. And you're presented with a mathematical equation. 2 + 2.
Mm-hmm.
You come up with the answer 4. And we did some experiment to show that the physiological thought process of arithmetic happens quicker than the physiological maybe it's even pushing a button. The physiological process of generating an emotion, then presumably in that context, the emotion couldn't possibly have driven your actions.
But there's emotion behind pushing the button. It's why we push. What I'm saying is, we would not ever push the button if we didn't get some sort of emotional reaction from it. It's the emotion of pushing the button that drives us to push the button, because it's satisfying somehow to push the button, whether or not it does anything or not, because just pushing the button is doing something. But the emotion of that is what drives the pushing of the button. If you put a monkey in a room and there's shit in one bowl and bananas in the other, it doesn't take a scientist to understand which one they will pick, and it's the one that gives them the better emotion every single time.
If we put someone on lithium, will they perform less actions?
What do you mean by that?
Lithium is known to blunt emotion.
So will they perform less actions?
Yeah, I mean, if emotion motivates action and you have less, emotion, then maybe you'll get less action, right?
That does make sense, yeah. That would make sense.
Would make sense, but as far as I'm aware, lithium is given to people to make them more functional, not less functional.
What do you mean more functional?
So here we go. Wikipedia. Lithium is a mood stabilizer that can help people have more control over their emotions. While lithium doesn't seem to affect concentration or short-term memory, it can have some effects on psychomotor speed, verbal memory, and verbal fluency. Lithium can cause drowsiness and make people feel less mentally sharp, even at a correct dose. Another side effect is cognitive dulling, which can cause people to feel less alert or sharp.
So the question is, would lithium cause people to perform more or less actions?
Yes.
Well, I guess you'd have to define action too. It's like, what do you
Yeah,
mean
I
by
mean, that's
action?
true. Like murder or like planting stuff in your
So
garden.
making conscious decisions.
Acting on conscious decisions, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, that's acting on. That's that. Well, that's a. I'm getting stuck up on that because acting, it could mean something. Do you mean doing something physically, like moving your own body?
Yeah, that's based.
What about deciding whether or not you want to move to like somewhere in Arizona? What was it, Phoenix or I forgot the other one. Like New York or LA, you're choosing between the two. Would someone on lithium make which reaction? What are you asking? I don't get this question.
I don't know. I give up. I don't have a question.
I don't get it either. I'm sorry. Um. Okay. I'm gonna. I don't know. I guess the point behind all this is it's trying to figure out what to do. It's like why I one thing I like to ask people in this Discord is like, why are you here? What is driving your being here rather than on YouTube? Or it's like, what emotion are you looking for when you're on Discord?
I mean, the only thing I could think of in terms of an argument to this, I mean, like, I think it's more or less true, but I think that, like, there are ways in which emotions, well, like, there's an emotional valence to all experience, and that emotion can drive decision making. But if you look at something like purpose or values, like if you have as part of your values being family oriented or being responsible or being dedicated to justice or something,
Right.
like there can be, and you might make personal sacrifices in pursuit of expressing that value that might inherently involve repressing or some kind of emotion. And so it's like you could say that at the end of the day, there is a feeling of satisfaction of living in alignment with your values. But I wouldn't say that a value is an emotion particularly. It may have like a cluster of emotions that might go along with it of being,
But wouldn't the values be based off of emotion? It's like the value
I'm
of
saying it's like there could be a cluster of emotions that might
yeah,
be
yeah,
associated
and it's not that there's
with
one specific
alignment with
one.
that emotion. But I wouldn't say that the value in and of itself like is an emotion.
Why wouldn't you?
Because it could be beyond like your personal subjective state of your, like if you have in pursuit of, like I said, in pursuit of a value, if you make some sacrifice, like that can deliberately try to where you are sort of withstanding difficult emotions.
Okay,
like
okay.
Fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's pushing through because you realize like, oh, I would say that through trying to honor your values, you understand that the payoff is bigger than all the suffering that you have to get through in order to get to the payoff. That's how we.
And I would, yeah, and I would just say that like I wouldn't necessarily consider that payoff necessarily to be emotional.
What else would it be if not emotional? The payoff of fulfilling justice.
I think that there are greater senses of purpose and value that transcend emotion.
Well, those would. I would say that that aligns more with like the divinity emotion that I can't describe.
Well, I mean that's how I would categorize.
Yes. I don't know. It's not how you, and that's just how I say, because the reason I say divinity is it's like it's something above everything that I can't
Like if
quite
I
put words to.
yeah sorry
Keep going.
if I, for example, if I'm an artist and I sit down to work, I have a commitment to the pursuit of my craft and creativity, and I commit to working every morning, regardless of whatever emotional state, whether I feel like doing it, whether I don't feel like doing it, like regardless of the sort of like the winds of change of emotion that might happen. And there could be a deeper sense of satisfaction and kind of purpose somewhere at the end, but I would say that there's something bigger than all of that that drives the pursuit. Just as another example.
So that I think we had a conversation, I think a week ago, about having children and like the decision whether or not to or to have children.
Right. Yeah.
We'd had that decision, and what I was getting at is like I truly think that having a child, it unlocks a level of emotion that you can't experience until you have a child.
I could say the same thing about having a cat.
Yeah, no, I'm not. What I'm saying is that's probably true. Having a cat likely unlocks a level of emotion that you didn't realize existed until you have a cat and adopt one, and one's lounging around and you like it's just part of your daily life. It's I think that having a child is higher than having a cat. I think that having a cat is along the same lines of.
Some people hate that they have children.
Well, it's interesting though, because like I remember our sort of like conflict in the discussion was like about like whether or not having a child will make you happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the interesting thing about like the notion of happiness is that most people associate that with a mood, but happiness oftentimes is there's a greater sense of satisfaction, or like you might be willing to withstand or sacrifice the pains and difficulties of parenthood in service of that pursuit of happiness that is bigger than a given emotion.
Yeah, and I guess the happiness thing is it was a semantic thing in that argument. Like a semantic issue is when I say happiness, I mean the highest happiness that you'll ever feel in your life.
Right.
Like
So,
pursuing
that's
that.
the divinity thing you're talking about.
Yes. That's part of the divinity thing. It's like I have experienced personally this level of happiness. So every time I say the word happiness, I'm talking about that. It's just the happiest that I'd ever felt. And that's what I'm trying to pursue all the time. But when I talk about it, if they have not felt that level of happiness, it's difficult for people to understand where I'm coming from and align with it. It's just I can't give them that level of context. They have to have lived my experience in order to get that.
You talking specifically about having children or something?
No, not having children. It wasn't even having children. It was a edible trip. I'm not even joking.
Okay.
That it just, I felt that, oh, your brain can give you that satisfaction, and our bodies, it's like it's these people that I've talked to that said like, oh, I've done ecstasy before, and that was a really high point in my life, like the highest point in my life, right behind having a child. And when I hear that, I'm like, okay, then there has to be something to having a child. There has to be. Because for someone to have, like, take this drug and then say that having a child feels better than this drug, there needs to be something there. And it sort of makes sense, because what would be the point in continuing to raise your kids after they're born and not just chasing like the base high of the sexual act. It's like we don't just want the as I don't know. It's like for some reason we're motivated to actually care and take care of this child after it's born. So there must be some sort of emotion attached to having that child in order to enforce the raising of that child in our own heads. It's like the value thing.
Sure.
It's like I think that the values are based on those really core emotions. Inside Out did a great picture of this. It's like those core memories were memories where emotions were first introduced. So like one of the core memories is fear, and that memory, it unlocked this, like it was the first time they'd experienced fear, and fear became a new emotion that now plays in the person. But the first one, I think was funny, is the first one is happiness. That's the first emotion in the Inside Out movie. It's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, who knows? I don't know. It just makes sense to me, honestly. That's where I'm coming from. I don't know what else to say.
All good.
I try to evoke emotions to modify people's behavior. Like I try to get fat people to experience absolute terror to make them better people.
Well, that's a honorable goal. You're trying to help them.
Yeah,
think-
you'd be shocked how fast people run when you're chasing them with a knife.
It's not, and that's nice. It's nice that you do that.
Yeah, I like to give back.
You care about people. That's the emotion behind everything you do.
I think I don't know. I think that there can be a tendency for our kind of deepest, most meaningful experience of wonder or joy or the numinous or whatever it is in our the unique way that we've experienced that. I think that there can be a tendency to sort of say that only through that means can you experience something similar. And this can kind of turn into certain kind of sectarianism in terms of religious experience, and sort of a feeling of superiority and judging other people. And I kind of question that a little bit because it's sort of, I mean, you can't really know the inner experience of another person. You can only really know what your experience has been. So, I mean, to say like, if I'm involved in a certain kind of religion and I have certain experience, I can say like, that's the only path toward that sense of whatever, freedom, union, divinity, and that you could possibly understand what that experience is as somebody who does not practice this specific religion. So
Yes.
I think I'd be maybe a little skeptical of that, of regarding your own experiences of divinity in relationship with other people and what their experience has been.
I like the way you're bringing this up because it reminds me of an example of this happening in my own life, where there was I was in a Walmart parking lot with my coworker, and this guy approached us. He was really young, wearing like baggy clothes, and he invited us to a Bible study. And I think it was a couple weeks after I actually decided to go. Like, he gave me his number, and I decided to go to this Bible study. And it was to go to this. Have you heard of this religion? It's where these Koreans, they thought that Jesus came back as a South Korean, and there now there's like hundreds of thousands of people that follow this religion. And what the religion essentially is it's they're following the Bible, but separate from all of the previous Christianity. Is they're just examining the Bible and following the Bible as close to how they can in Korean as possible. And I think it being in South Korean is what made it so big. Is people that weren't South Korean couldn't actually have the conversation with them and say, hey, you're doing this wrong. So they were able to just follow the Bible by itself without the interference of like traditional Christianity, like the Catholic Church and Western idea, like Western thought, because Western thought's based off of our language, and Eastern thought is based off their language. And somehow they were able to align Eastern thought through the language with Christianity. And this religion became so popular that there's people in America that follow it too, because of I imagine it's this guy. I was having a conversation with this guy and asking him questions about the Bible, and he didn't like that. He didn't like that I was just asking questions about what I didn't understand about the Bible and explaining to him why I didn't align with it. He didn't like it so much that he asked me to leave the Bible study. And it was just a room with me, him, and that gentleman that invited me. So, like, I imagine that this guy has a very positive connection with this religion, which is essentially Christianity, just an offspring of it, with the way that they follow Christianity being separate from like the main hub of Christianity. And he was really happy with Christianity, but then I started asking him the questions, and it seemed that he didn't align with it as well. And you could see he was feeling uncomfortable with the questions I was asking him, because he didn't have the answers to the questions I was asking him. Because he was only basing his thought on the words in the Bible. So like full on appeal to authority. And I was asking him what he felt about them. And he didn't like that, because I think he found it very comfortable that he didn't have to rely on his own thought to answer questions in the past, and that people just accepted those answers. I don't know if that aligns with what you told me, but it made me think about that story.
Yeah, probably the sort of reverence to the authority of the book or the teachings or whatever is what defines their experience to be pure, to be spiritual in that context. So yeah.
And it was funny because I remember the moment when he wanted me to leave was when I'd asked him if he was a father. And then I'd asked him about that feeling of like becoming a father. And that's when he realized like, oh, no one, I don't think anyone's ever asked him about that feeling before. So
it doesn't, yeah, I don't know enough about Christianity or whatever, but it doesn't seem like in that context that sort of like introspection is really welcomed or appropriate, maybe. Like, insofar as it furthers your dedication to the Bible or whatever, then I guess it makes sense. I don't know enough about it. But yeah, that's having like those sort of questions doesn't work well. I think that like regardless of one's even people who claim or traditions that claim to be sort of more sectarian and less dogmatic still fall victim to that to a certain degree. But yeah, I don't know. Just in terms of the experience of like having kids or on ecstasy or like you had with your edible or whatever, there might be like uniqueness to that. But it's really hard to know the inner lives of other people. I think most people probably aren't particularly introspective. And I mean, it's taken me a while just to kind of like accept that about most people, and that most people don't really have a frame of interest or kind of a desire to kind of do this kind of like deep inner exploration, meaning stuff like that.
But
for a lot of people,
that's what the original pitch for Christianity was like, hey, go interpret this book by yourself, only with your, like, take the rules and try to understand God on a personal level. And that was I mean, it never stayed for long because people started teaching it, and the problem is that everyone gathers to hear one guy talk about it every week. That's like the traditional Christian. So there isn't really the self in it. Like you're not analyzing yourself compared to it. You're finding key words that this guy's saying that align with your life, but it doesn't. There's no work on one's part in most of these religions, and that's my issue with them. It's why I don't really call myself a Christian, even though I believe a lot of what's I think that a lot of what's in the Bible helps a lot in understanding oneself. But I wouldn't say I'm Christian. And I with this idea, I go about it and I understand that people feel. So like I understand I feel, and I see other people, so I give them the same weight that I give myself, in that I know that they feel emotion at the same level I do, and their happiest moment may not be as happy as how I felt, but technically it is as happy as I felt, because it's it's the only thing that they have to reference. So if their highest high was eating this cheeseburger and mine was this experience that I'd had, it's my highest high and it's their highest high, and those two things are technically equal. What I'm trying to introduce to people is just higher highs. It's like I truly think that having a kid is one of the highest highs a human can feel.
But you've never had a child, though, right?
I haven't. That's sort of, I'm just.
And how do you know that?
Right. I the only way I know that is from asking people what the happiest moment in their life is, and from them telling me that is. It's like that's all I'm really basing it off of. But for some reason, it works. It's like the weird faith thing.
What works? What works?
That I believe them. I believe that it was the happiest moment in their life.
Right. Do you consider it a I don't know. I don't want to
please
like dissuade you or like challenge that, because this is like gets into like kind of a personal.
No. This is where I like to go. Please.
I guess it's just like, I feel like having that kind of expectation around the experience, like what if you had that experience, and like, for example, like, have you heard of like postpartum depression?
Yes.
Like, there's a lot of women that, I'm sure that just like the hormonal changes undergone during and after pregnancy are just very intense. I don't know exactly the physiology or whatever, but I mean, like, a lot of women get like suicidal.
Yeah.
And like, it's not uncommon to have that experience. And if you're going into the experience of childbirth being told by everyone that this is like the most meaningful, special thing that's ever happened to you, if you have that kind of that's going to happen to you as a person,
mm-hmm.
if you have that sort of expectation, and then you have this sort of like rock bottom experience, I think that can create a level of like disorientation and disillusionment and frustration and confusion that I think could be problematic, and I think makes it really hard for people.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of similar to like if you're a young person and you're being told that, like, you know, your high school years or your college years, those are the best years of your life, so really enjoy it. And you're in high school or college and you're absolutely miserable. you could kind of like conclude from that like, just based on what other people said, that like, if this is the best my life is going to get and it's this bad, like, this is not look good for my future kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, I think I would.
I think that you can only make that judgment
like,
after you've grown up, though. It's like the only people that say that are people that have gone through that experience.
Or only people who themselves had, that their high school experience was the best thing, the best years of their life. There are many people for whom there could be, later on they found greater, more enduring satisfaction or happiness. I don't know. I just feel like having that expectation, childbirth, especially because you haven't had it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's like a level of like, does this guy even know what he's talking about to it?
Well, no. Just that like you're setting yourself up for,
right. Okay, that it could end up being like, oh no, I was wrong. Now I have to reanalyze. That's the way I approach life. Is like, if that happens, then I'm just going to dive deep into that.
And you, and I don't want to like get into like challenging your kind of like functional epistemology in terms of like people tell you this or whatever. Like, I look at the fact that like the research on happiness levels and parents, as we talked about last time, that it's pretty consistently shows that people who don't have children are considered to be happier. So it's like, I look at that and like I consider that to be, and like I respect the fact that you don't view things the same way, but like I find that more compelling in terms of trying to discover what might be true in the future about having children.
I guess we can go back to the same analogy about the highest high, where if you don't have kids, you're sort of saving yourself from ruining all the other highs in life. It's like once you have kids, now your life is about your kids, because that is what drives your high. So if you never have kids, you don't have to worry about that high being higher than all the other mundane things in life. At least things that weren't mundane before now just don't give you as much happiness because you have this high that you felt. But that high serves to help your kids. It's like the reason that high exists, I think, is because
how long does that high last?
I think it lasts until you die. Just because you felt it, just because you felt it, it changes the way you see the world.
You can't say that though.
Where no, it's like when I felt the high during that edible trip, because I experienced happiness at a level that I'd never experienced before. One was, on my day to day, I still can rely on the small things to make me happy. So a cigarette, that still amps me up a bit. But my life is now like, let's go higher than that. Maybe kids are the answer to that. Maybe kids are like, that's the high. That's the next high.
What do you mean by high?
The high of happiness, like the experiencing happiness at that level.
So like joy?
Yeah, but like the amount of joy is what I'm talking about.
But I mean, it's like with drugs. Like if you have a very high, there's always a come down.
There's a come down, and then you level back out, and you're like, everything. I think that maybe that's the explanation for postpartum depression, is that they had experienced such a euphoria in having a child that everything that precedes that it just feels less. Because of what they're referencing it to.
I think there might be other physiological reasons.
Yeah. No, I'm saying physiologically, wouldn't that make sense? For like, let's say having a kid is
I don't know if
heroin.
Necessarily, I don't know if that model, and I don't know enough about it, but I'm not sure if it aligns to just sort of like a peak emotion or like an intensity of joy and then fallout, and there might be other factors, but I don't know. I guess it's just like I mean, obviously you hear this with drugs. I mean, you hear it with people who do spiritual seeking also, where in pursuit of a high, they actually can kind of cause damage to their lives and be irresponsible in certain ways in order to have this experience again and again. I mean, certainly with heroin.
Yeah.
People will report it being that kind of experience, like the highest high.
Mhm.
Everything else is sort of pales in comparison, and nothing can ever give me that level of satisfaction again. I think that like that is a pursuit. I mean, I see it. I don't want to like judge you or like your decision making or anything like that, but I think that like that can create problems and be sort of like unsustainable because like there was like a classical pianist had a quote about this that like as he got older there was kind of a more enduring sense of satisfaction with his work that wasn't as defined by sort of like peak experiences. Like that's another framework you could look at as like peak experiences.
Yeah, that's likely how I'm
interesting.
conducting my life is through peak experience.
Right. I mean, I think that there are a lot of aspects of child rearing that fail to meet the criteria of peak experience.
Okay.
But
Okay, well,
I guess that's good.
I'll be honest. I gotta go.
I'll get
Hey, but thank you so much for this. I mean, sort of
Yeah,
continuation
good
of the
chat.
same conversation, but yeah, I enjoyed this a lot.
And I don't mean to judge you by this. I'm just like, it's just what I think.
No, I appreciate
but
it.
anyway.
You're looking out for me, and that I thank you for that. I'm gonna
Sure.
think about this obviously, and I'll see you again in here,
Sure,
and
sure.
we can talk in the future.
Cool. All right, have a good one.
All right, I'll catch you. All right, my camera cut off towards the end there, didn't it? Yeah, it totally did, but my voice carried on. Thank you so much, everyone who watched, anyone who's watching later. This is just going to stay up, and you can watch it whenever you want. I mean, that's philosophy. This is episode 1 out of a gazillion, so get ready. This is going to be not daily, it's going to be often. Thanks so much, everyone. Love y'all.